Welcome to the Claville Report, a report that talks about law, policy, and politics. These three areas tend to dominate our lives every single day. This report was created to pull back the covers, eliminate the white noise, and understand the reasoning behind the world today. We're about giving you the facts from all sides and not personal opinions. We're not about what should be and should not be, but instead, we're about what is and what can be. And now, here's your host, E.W. Claville.
Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of the Claville Report. I'm Dr. Eric Claville, and we want to thank you for joining us and supporting us in Season 1, where we took policy, law, and politics and broke down cultural issues to pull back the covers and delve a little deeper into very important issues affecting us on an everyday basis. In Season 1, we covered many hot topics and issues in the public policy and political realm. This season, we're going to do just the same, because here on this report, we believe that by being informed, you can make a more well-informed decision about the policies, the politics, and the representatives that are affecting your life on a daily basis. So in this first series here on Season 2, we're going to take a look at what I believe is one of the most important aspects of our democracy, and that is the power to vote. In this, we believe that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was probably the most powerful and the most effective federal legislation that came through our democracy in the last really 60 years. Now, outside of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which put what I call a foot on the head of the serpent of discriminatory acts against African Americans and other identified minorities, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which not only provided the right to vote to African Americans and others who were discriminated against, but it provided protections. Now, a very interesting point about the 1965 Voting Rights Act is that the right to vote was actually provided to African American men during the time of what we call the Civil War amendments, the Reconstruction Amendments, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. However, the power to vote was actually taken away under what we call Jim Crow laws. These were local policies in local communities that took advantage of African Americans and their lack of being able to defend themselves under the law and protect themselves from harassment, which could reach the level of death, and it did for many, in order when they went to the polls to vote and cast their decision for policies affecting them. So under this Voting Rights Act, it gave protections to African Americans. It gave protection to women. It gave protections to many who did not have the power to vote and were not protected when they went to the polls to vote. So in other words, literacy tests were null and void. Poll taxes were null and void. Guess how many jelly beans in the jelly jar were null and void, and the like. It's hard to imagine, I tell you, that even today, that some of our grandparents and some of our parents actually had to go and pay a tax in order to go vote. It's unfathomable for many reasons, but it also makes you proud to be not just an American, but proud to cast your vote anytime you go to the polls. It was a piece of legislation that really worked to correct the wrongs of yesterday to help to build a better future. So when the Voting Rights Act of 1965 found tremendous success in increasing the number of African Americans going to the polls to vote, it also increased registrations and it increased a political awareness like no other. But over time, It also caused those who were in power that did not agree with the Voting Rights Act of 1965 or the increased protections of African Americans in our local communities and across the country, of being able to participate in what we call, or I call, this American experiment. Throughout this process, the only part of the Voting Rights Act that really protected African American voters and others who were discriminated against from going to the polls and being victimized again was also this part in Section 5 called preclearance. Now, there was a formula that was created for states and localities that historically had discriminated against African Americans. And under that formula, or what we call a coverage formula, individuals found themselves subject to the oversight of the U.S. Department of Justice. So anytime any type of voting provisions, any type of voting laws, any type of changes in representative districts, which takes place every 10 years, after the U.S. Census is given every 10 years, is what's called redistricting. Those laws, those proposed amendments, those proposed maps had to be sent to the U.S. Department of Justice Office of Division of Civil Rights in order to be pre-cleared to say, this is okay. You can implement these policies, these laws, these provisions for elections because they do not go against or do not hurt the individuals, the African Americans and others who were discriminated against and harassed from voting. Over time, we saw the success of this act. Over time, we saw the success of this policy. Over time, we saw the success of this preclearance. But just as all things change, so did the ideology around this particular area of preclearance, as interpreted by the courts. And in a very controversial decision in 2013, in a case entitled Shelby County versus Holder, there was a challenge to the coverage formula for this particular state that had historically discriminated against African Americans from voting. The Supreme Court, in a very narrow decision, concluded that the preclearance formula was out of date. And by being out of date, it stated that the increased participation of African Americans, the increased voting of African Americans in the process, registrations and the like, show where, in part, this formula was not needed anymore. So therefore, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act of preclearance was made invalid or null and void. If the very formula itself was null and void, then there was no need for Section 5. Well, immediately after this decision, you can only imagine on both sides of the spectrum how each side felt. Section 5 itself was the protection, the ultimate protection that was needed. But unfortunately, Section 5 being invalid removed that protection. By doing so, almost immediately, former states that had discriminated against African Americans and other minorities from voting went to work on the local level and the state level, more specifically in state legislatures, drafting and passing laws that were not only discriminatory, but these laws also limited the participation of African Americans all over their community. As a matter of fact, in one state in particular, in North Carolina, when the legislature itself created laws, voter ID laws, that primarily hindered African Americans from voting, it was appealed to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeal, where the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeal stated that not only was the law unlawful and unconstitutional, but the reason behind the law is what the court said it was almost by surgical precision to disadvantage or hurt the African American community. Also, in other states, voter ID laws and other laws stopping or interfering with the access to the ballot box were drafted, were introduced, and then were passed, and those bills became laws. So we saw where the process to protect the vote actually moved, unfortunately, to a process to destroy the vote of African Americans and those others to which the 1965 Voting Rights Act was meant to protect. But North Carolina wasn't done, because just only last month, the court ruled and declared another voter ID law to be invalid. Well, as the saying goes, if you don't first succeed, try again. This was very true when many marched and many fought and many died for the right to vote. It's also true now, where many are fighting, many are moving within legislatures, passing policies and laws to prevent individuals to have the right to vote. So why are people attacking voting rights? And why is voting rights needed to move our democracy? And more specifically, why are Black voting rights being attacked? From the inception of this country, we found that the right to vote was provided only to white men who owned property. Now, eventually, the various laws were passed to incorporate other white males into society that were given and provided the opportunity to vote. In other words, if you were not of white European descent in European America, you were not afforded the right to vote. As a matter of fact, you were written out by the law by, in part, not being included. As African Americans, we understand that our existence on this particular continent, as relates to European America, started in a position of slavery. And for almost 250 years, it existed that way. Even in our Constitution, full citizenship was not provided. Instead, it was a portion of property, not citizenship, of 3/5 that of a person for the purpose of representation in the House and also in the Senate, in order to provide the apportionment of representatives to represent various states in our federal government. By no way and by no means did the founding fathers of this country think that enslaved Africans should have the right to vote and participate in this American dream. By no way did they believe that the Native Americans should participate and have the right to vote in this American experiment. By no way did they believe that women, no matter white, Black, Native American, should and have the right to participate in this American experiment from the aspect of voting. Well, why is that the case? To be able to vote, I believe, and according to my theory in which I teach from, it is the ability to pass laws and public policy. And what is the effect of laws and public policy? I believe that laws and public policy are created in its intent or in its effect to control and dictate 3 aspects of our society: people, beliefs, and resources. By the power of the vote, you're able to create the policies and the laws and the public policy to control what people can have access, which persons can own property, which individuals in our society can move freely and operate across this vast and beautiful country. Not only that, but in controlling resources. Laws, public policy are created to provide access and provide the apportionment of resources in our society to whatever community, whatever persons, and whatever families and corporations have the ability to operate in our society. And then finally, belief. Well, you ask yourself, how can policy and laws control belief? Well, I'll give you the example. If a law is passed to say that there are certain water fountains or certain accommodations in which one group of individuals should have and others should not, then over the course of time, when that policy takes effect, as individuals, as human beings, we all do it. We go into what's called a routine, a habit. And those habits almost become the rule of law to us because we've always done it. So if for generations, years, decades, we operate in a certain way, we access various venues based upon our geographical location, our gender, or our race, and we're forbidden to access others based upon our geographical location, our birthplace, our race, our gender. Then as we operate through society, these actions become habit forming, and these habits that have formed become our way of life. And our way of life become the unspoken rules of law. And therefore, we pass that down to generations. By doing so, we now impart in our children, in our posterity, that this is the way our society operates, and this is the way it's always been, and this is the way it always should be. So as you can see, the power to vote is so powerful because it's just not pressing a button, circling in a bubble, or yelling a campaign stump speech. But it's power behind what you put your power of the vote behind. Because ultimately, it will control what you believe, it will control where you're able to access and travel throughout this country. And finally, it will control our resources and what you're able to have, the opportunity to take advantage of. So why are these laws attacking the Black vote? Well, I hate to call it the Black vote, but in essence, when we look at voting blocks, we have the women vote, we have the senior citizen vote, we have the youth vote, we have the millennial vote, we have the Black vote, the African American vote, we have the Hispanic vote, we have the white vote, we have the suburban vote. These are voting blocks that when you look at public policy and strategy behind passing various bills or getting support behind it, it's looked upon in this way. But the power, the reason behind fighting this very important vote, we can look no further than what has taken place because of the vote, the Black vote. Over the course of time, African Americans have not only provided their labor, their talents, their ingenuity, and their loyalty to our country, but they've also provided, when earning and fighting for the right to vote, a major voting bloc in order to benefit various candidates across localities, states, and the country. By doing this, we see where races are literally decided because of the turnout of African American voters. We look no further than the last several presidential elections. when African Americans who vote at a higher rate than all, if not most, demographic groups, that vote helps to determine, in large part, the winner of those elections. We find where the Black vote ushered in a major change in the way that we view who should be our president and vice president. Because of that, we were able to elect our first Black president, our first Black vice president. Not only that, but we're able to push changes in the way states have voted over the course of time. Because of the work of many in former Confederate states, we've seen where those states are no longer voting and very reliable on one side of the aisle. But we find now where the vote itself has flipped a lot of those states and not only made them competitive, but made them reliable in a more progressive way. So when we look at where the attacks of voting against voting are coming from, and we look at who they're targeted to, we can look no further than history. As African Americans, we were never thought of to have the opportunity to participate in this American experiment. And when we fought for it and earned it, it wasn't given to us. When we fought for it and earned it, we find that now our voice is mighty when voting for the candidates and the policies and the laws of our choice. So, what can we do to help protect it? Well, not only just in North Carolina, but according to the voting roundup of the Brennan Center for Justice, they found that as of this year, so far of July 2021, we have over 30 bills that have become law, which basically stops or hinders or limits the access to the ballot box for many African Americans. 18 states have enacted these various laws. As a matter of fact, there were over 400 bills at the time of the writing of this last voting roundup. Over 400 bills with provisions to restrict voting access were introduced in 49 states in 2021. We find that some of the most egregious of these were in the state of Georgia, in the state of Texas, and others also in the state of Florida. But one in particular in Georgia where it makes it a crime to provide assistance of water or food to individuals who are standing in line to vote. Why is this important? It's important because we find where when we have these very long lines, which tend to be in heavily populated African American or minority areas or poor areas, it helps to deter voting. But because of generations of African Americans and others who have fought for the right to vote, we know the importance of this. And we fight and we fight and we continue to fight. Now, likewise, there also have been 25 states that have enacted 54 laws with provisions to expand the access to voting. More specifically, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the governor signed ceremoniously in the Virginia Voting Rights Act, where it helps to strengthen and protect access to the ballot box. It is indeed an example to all states that want to protect on the state level. But is it that enough? Is it enough to just enact on the state level? Or do we need a federal law? As a matter of fact, many believe that a federal law is just exactly what we need. So the H.R. 4, the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act of 2021, is a bill introduced through Congress in order to do just that. And what does this bill do? It basically restores and provides protection in the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And the question that many would ask is, does it do enough, and why is it needed today? Well, it's needed today because the fight for the right to vote is a fight that never ends. A fight to protect voters is a fight that never ends. A fight to ensure that generations to come will have this opportunity that we enjoyed for so many decades because of the fight of our brave, courageous mothers, fathers, grandmothers, grandfathers, and others that supported them will not be in vain. It goes to protect and strengthen, to restore pre-clearance. It goes to protect and strengthen access to the voting box. It goes to protect the right to vote. But what is the prospect of it passing? What is the prospect of it surviving and continuing to gain support in order so that this bill can eventually become law? I'm reminded of 1965, the Voting Rights Act, where it was something that was needed, but the political courage wasn't there. Now, Lyndon Baines Johnson, I believe, is one of the greatest presidents that we've ever had because he was the one that took it upon himself during his presidency to say, I'm going to ensure and effectuate the vision of John F. Kennedy, who unfortunately was assassinated. And by doing that, it wasn't easy. He was someone who had to use all of his political wit and will and strategy to bring factions together that were so far apart. But he did it. But in order to do that, in some instances, he had to be made to do it. You know, there's a story that's told that we're meeting with various civil rights leaders. He was told them, he just said, listen, they were saying, we need this voting rights bill, we need this. He said, make me do it. Make me do it. And in essence, what he was saying is that this democracy just doesn't belong to us on Capitol Hill, in the White House, in the Supreme Court, but it belongs to you, the people. That is why in our U.S. Constitution, we the people is so powerful. Because we are the embodiment of this American experiment. We are the embodiment of perfecting the idea that the founding fathers had. Yes. Now, we're all short-sighted in some way. And the founding fathers indeed were short-sighted when it came to opportunities, access, and citizenship of individuals in the land at the time, and for those that were to come. Yes, America has become that beacon of light to the rest of the world. Yes, America remains the place where others believe that they can have a fresh start. America is the place where ideas of democracy, ideas of freedoms, of speech, of religion, of press, the ability to assemble peacefully, the ideas that we as a nation, out of many, can become one. It is that experiment, it is that idea that this Voting Rights Act, this Advancement Act, named after one of his greatest champions, John R. Lewis, in which we believe it can be a major addition to the laws that help to protect all of us and generations to come. But it won't happen without the people. It won't happen without the people pushing. It won't happen without the people advocating for it. So, in essence, we are the people that can make it happen. We are the people that can protect voting rights, and we are the people that can move mountains with the power of the vote. We want to thank you again for joining us for this first session of the Claville Report. I'm Dr. Eric Claville. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Claville Report. Make sure you subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. For information or to connect with E.W. Claville, check out our website at www.theclavillereport.com. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to @The Claville Report on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. This has been the latest episode of The Claville Report. Until next time, be well.